clients that I was working with was is a large software company. So they focus on developing tools for project management, collaboration, code quality, and they have about 5,000 people globally. So that was not skipping too far ahead to challenges, but that was a challenge for us too from a actual time zone perspective. So we were looking at specifically targeting engineers, project managers, and program managers within the organization. And we had a very interesting task. So Crystal and I spent a lot of time together really brainstorming the best way to approach this, because we were tasked with identifying best practices within the organization that they could standardize around. And in addition to that, really looking at how can we roll out or give them effective ways, essentially a learning cluster, to roll out these best practices for adoption at scale. The first thing we learned is that the organization hates the word best practice. So we had to come up with a new term. We landed on freedom within a framework, or optional framework. So that was an interesting challenge that hit us very quickly. But what was so interesting about this organization, or what is interesting about them, is that they put a very, very, very high value on autonomy. So it's part of their core values. They are an autonomous organization. They are very, very much on the mode of self-sufficiency, figure it out. And so with that, when it's a small organization, you can imagine that really breeds a lot of creativity. Obviously, being in close proximity to each other, you can share those ideas. But as this organization grew into a 5,000 people global organization, that started to essentially leave some kinks in the chain. And there were no standards put in place to roll out mechanisms and processes. And so with that, what was happening is all throughout the organization, people were coming up with their own best practices and own ways of doing things for the same exact thing. And so we were really brought in to help figure out what should the standard, without using that word, but best practices look like across the organization, and then what would rolling that out look like. And so what was really, really unique about this, and my personal kind of favorite part of what we found, it was a really good learning opportunity for me, is that not only when we were working on the learn action, so doing learner personas and really trying to understand where everyone was coming from, not only did we end up finding out that we had individual personas. So we had experienced Eli as an individual persona, so someone who's been with the organization for a long time, versus junior Jen, who is more new to her role, more of a recent grad. But we ended up identifying that whole teams were also personas. So we were able to look at it from not only an individual perspective, but then from a team perspective, and having to develop clusters around teams. So for example, we had transitioning teams, so teams that had a lot of movement in between them. We had dependent teams, so teams that were dependent on other teams to be able to do their job and have those pieces put together. So it was really, really important that during our persona interviews and during the learn action, that not only do we focus and identify on individual ways of working and learning new information, but we also had to dive deep into the team norms that were put in place that dictated the ways that the team learned too. So it was a very unique situation. Out of that complexity really bred some interesting findings. And so it took us a while, but through our persona interviews, through many, many, many hours of persona interviews, we were able to find a common theme. And it was really challenging because the complexity of the organizational structure and because of the global nature, we were really trying to find some key themes to help us on our way. And once you find those themes, they click for you and it moves the project forward. But for us, we found that there was a linchpin that really impacted every single one of those personas, whether it was an individual or a team persona. And these were the program managers within the organization. So we found, I remember during this one interview, and the first time I heard about the program managers, and someone called them pollinators, and they go from team to team and they take good ideas from one and they bring them to the other. And that to me just stuck. And so what I always encourage people to do is, like, once you kind of hear something that really piques your interest, go down that path. And so I went to Crystal and I said, hey, I think we're onto something here. And we dove even deeper into the understanding more about these program managers. And so what was great is, like, we started to hear that theme over and over again, and we really switched our focus. We kind of made a complete 180 with this project and switched our focus on how can we level up and develop the program managers? Because if they're the ones that are impacting all of these other personas, well, who's impacting them? And we realized no one, like no one was focusing on them. No one's focusing on their development. Yet here they were actually being a pivotal part of developing all these individual personas and these team personas. And so what was even cooler about this is that these program managers not only became personas, but they became a learning asset in and of themselves. So in the bigger cluster, program managers were actually a learning asset for us. And so we really focused on creating first and foremost, a cluster specifically for those program managers that would allow them to really disseminate the information that they learned back to the teams that they're working with. So I do have, let me see, go ahead and share that with you all here so you can get an idea of what that looks like.
And just while you're sharing, for those of you who, again, might not be as familiar with the LCD model, this Venn diagram you're seeing is our learning cluster template. So it's broken out into these 3 touch points: formal, social, and immediate, as a way to help organize all the learning assets you create to help people across the flow of work. So just so you get some context there, this is actually a part of our surround action and our learning cluster template.
Yeah. So this is what we created just specifically for the program manager. And what was so interesting is that in talking to them more, we actually found out that they, for the most part, already operate in a learning cluster. So it was, for us, it was more about filling in the blanks for the resources they didn't already have. And so what we noted through our interviews was that they really like to self-serve before asking anyone for help. And so how can we make sure that those self-serve resources, especially in the immediate here, and especially Hello, which was their internal, their intranet, how is that set up for their success? So this is what we came up with, and essentially taking most of these assets that already exist, doing some work on the upgrade. So for example, teaching the organization how to write pages on their intranet for learning purposes. And so we were able to provide all of this information to really take most of these things that they already have within their organization, but put them into a cluster that really made sure that the program managers had everything that they need. So they were able to then go and take the information and go and pollinate the rest of the group. So it was a really interesting, we learned so much. I personally learned so much from this, and really looking at, okay, we can have individual and team personas, that a persona could be a persona and it could be a learning asset. So it was really awesome to see the fluidity of the model come to life and how much things can change and adapt as you're going through. And that's one of the reasons I love the Learn Action so much, because we were talking about it in my groups earlier in the breakouts of really being able to focus on your learner is really the ultimate way and guide forward to modern learning. And this was we realized a need here and focused on it, and it was very, very successful.